When I bought a Nintendo Switch OLED about 2 months ago, I had a predetermined vision of how I would use it and how things would ultimately play out in the long run. This consisted primarily of an expectation that after playing through a number of NES classics and latest major exclusives, I'd gradually begin to shift away from the console altogether. That is, into the next big Nintendo release that interests me, and in the meantime, I'd pass the Switch down to my little ones so that they could enjoy the extensive catalog of family-friendly titles. Well, it's quite the understatement to say that I miscalculated, because nothing could be further from reality. For this video, I'll be sharing my initial thoughts and experience with owning the Nintendo Switch OLED alongside the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. We'll look at the hardware, the features, applications and use case scenarios, a few accessories that I cannot live without, and of course, we have to dive into some crossplay titles and ports, as well as some upcoming Nintendo Direct exclusives that have my utmost attention. So step inside and pull the curtain behind you. These are the confessions of a PS5 and a Series X owner who bought the Switch OLED as well. Being that I never owned the original Switch or the Switch Lite, the Switch ecosystem was 100% all new, and even though this latest model is the largest of the three with a 7-inch OLED display, I still have trouble referring to the Nintendo Switch OLED as a console at all, because the form factor and the weight is just so insignificant as compared to the hefty consoles consuming the corners of my media stand on the daily. Attaching the Joy-Cons adds a tad bit more weight, but it's hardly noticeable, and I was surprised to learn just how well the improved aluminum stand supports the console, even when the Joy-Cons are still attached, because the expectation is that the Joy-Cons will be removed when the Switch is used in tabletop mode. Discovering just how well this tabletop system really works made choosing a protective case exceedingly harder than I anticipated, because awesome cases such as the Scull&co Neo Grip, specifically designed not to inhibit its use, offer a lot less protection than cases such as the Scull&co Grip case that completely surrounds the entire backside, borders of the console, and Joy-Cons. So in most scenarios, when shopping for a protective case for the Switch OLED, you'll end up sacrificing the wonderfully built stand for heavy protection, or sacrificing optimal protection to retain access to the stand. Whichever route you choose, you honestly cannot go wrong with either of these two interchangeable grip cases, specifically designed for the Switch OLED. In fact, I cannot imagine using the Switch in handheld without a grip case such as these or something similar. Taking a closer look at the Joy-Cons themselves, the buttons are very clicky and responsive, as are the analog sticks, but I am a bit concerned about stick drift after reading up on the well-known issue tracking all the way back to the original Switch, but only time will tell. The included dock station is a component of the Switch OLED system that I imagined was going to be my predominant method of playing, but it turns out that hasn't been entirely accurate up until this point. But more on that in a little bit. The biggest dock station addition to the OLED model is that it now includes a LAN port for an Ethernet cable wire connection. Docking the Switch is a very simplistic process. However, you can run into trouble depending on the protective case that you opt for. But it just so happens that both the grip case and the Neo Grip are both compatible with the official dock station. Spec-wise, the Switch OLED has received some fair criticism, considering that there aren't very many improvements over the predecessor from a hardware standpoint, with the exception of the OLED display and internal storage, which received a slight bump from 32 gigs to 64. The OLED display resolution is unfortunately only still 720p, and 1080p remains the max resolution achievable when the Switch is used in dock mode. The stereo speakers have been improved over the original as well. However, outside of these upgrades, the Switch OLED is still sporting the very same internals as the standard Nintendo Switch version 2 predecessor, even the 4300 mAh rechargeable battery, which can provide an average between 4.5 and 9 hours of gameplay. Nevertheless, because the new OLED display is more energy efficient than the previous LCD display, depending on the game and the conditions, you will see some improvement in that department on the OLED. As far as storage expansion, the Switch OLED uses the very same microSD expansion option as before as well. And considering that the Switch is really only able to take advantage of no more than 1000 megabyte read speeds, if you can resist the temptation of the Switch branded SD cards, you can actually save more money and add even more gigs by going with a standard SanDisk microSD. I'm personally using the SanDisk Ultra 1TB microSD because I've been downloading the vast majority of my games on the Switch, so I don't have to keep up with a ton of physical games while I'm on the go, because the Scull&co Max Carry case can accommodate only up to 10 physical games. So with all of that said on the spec front, if you already own the original Nintendo Switch, to you I say I 110% understand your frustration, because I wholeheartedly believe that the Nintendo Switch OLED is the console that we should have gotten in the initial release in the first place, especially considering that the likelihood of a Switch Pro is becoming more and more less probable. One of the very first things I did when I powered on my Switch for the first time is toggle the default basic white theme to basic black, because I just find it more aesthetically pleasing, and I think that it makes the game thumbnails pop a lot more. Though I do really wish that this dark theme was carried over to the eShop as well, because I think that it would make it even better and more immersive browsing experience. After swapping the theme, I decided to change the console screen colors from Vivid Default to Standard, because I felt that Vivid makes a lot of the reds look a bit artificial, and while I can see myself toggling Vivid on for certain games, for the majority of the time, I think I'm going to be running with Standard. Next, I remapped a few of the buttons on the right Joy-Cons so that the layout is more in line with my DualSense and X-Controller muscle memory. But up until this day, I keep getting this remapping notice each and every time I wake the Switch. If you know a way to bypass this message, rather than going through with it, drop me a comment down below. Another feature I really do enjoy about this device is the fact that the Switch uses standard Bluetooth 4.1, which means pretty much any Bluetooth compatible headset or earbuds are compatible right off the bat. So you don't have to immediately run out and buy a dedicated wireless headset as with the PS5 and Series X. However, the Bluetooth capabilities of the Switch OLED is limited in that it lacks support for Bluetooth microphones, and no more than 2 wireless controllers can be used at a time when Bluetooth audio is in use. Pairing a Bluetooth headset with the Switch is extraordinarily simple via the system settings, but it would be a really nice feature to be able to toggle in between previously paired headsets and earbuds via the secret menu from holding down the home button for roughly 3 seconds. It would also be a great add to be able to shut down the console in dock mode via a Pro controller, for example, because as it stands now, you're only able to put the Switch into sleep mode from a distance. One of the greatest appeals of the Nintendo Switch console as a whole is the flexibility that the Switch ecosystem affords users: handheld, tabletop, and dock mode. A brilliant design that has always intrigued me since the original Switch release back in 2017. But back then, well before the release of the OLED model, I realize now that I made a mistake of viewing the Switch through the very same lens as with any other gaming console, because when it comes to modern consoles that we know and love today, the Nintendo Switch is quite literally an aberration. Much of my original perception of the Switch, admittedly so, was due to the assumption that my predominant method of playing would be in dock mode, inside the comfort of my office where my PS5, my Xbox Series X, and my OLED TV reside. But after getting the Switch in hand and seeing just how shockingly beautiful a 720p OLED display can be, an entirely different aptitude for gaming has been unlocked. Fast forward 2 months later, and I'm stunned beyond belief to say that I've probably played the Nintendo Switch OLED in dock mode less than 20% of the time. And what is even more shocking than that is the realization that my hours spent on the Switch during weekdays, Monday through Thursday, have at many times been greater than that on either my PS5 or my Series X, depending on which of the two I play less on a given week, which sounds absolutely crazy when I say it out loud. Now, whether or not this trend will continue on further into the months ahead still remains to be seen, but as a father of 2 children under 4, the Nintendo Switch OLED and handheld, paired with Scull&co cases and trigger grips, are proving to be a deadly combination for me during the weekdays. Hours that were traditionally reserved for browsing or streaming on my cell phone, as I keep an eye on my little ones that have completely taken over the TV in the evenings before bed, have gradually been diverted to gaming on the Switch. Roughly 75% handheld, 10% tabletop, and 15% docked overall. And while there are methods of playing the PS5 and the Series X remotely, such as Xbox Cloud Gaming and PS5 Remote Play, I think there's really something to be said about the simplicity and reliability of the Switch ecosystem when gaming on the go. I really like that when you're using the Switch on the go, you're not missing a beat with games that have been downloaded. Unless you're playing multiplayer or cloud-based games, the experience that you get with the Switch remains consistent no matter where you are, and I think that really lends itself to its charm. It's no secret that the Nintendo Switch OLED is significantly underpowered as compared to the PS5 and Series X consoles. Processing, graphical output, RAM, the Switch is far behind in that respect. But the lack of beefy internals lends itself to the Switch's low weight and portability, so I understand that I have to be cognizant of that when I start feeling like I need more power. And following a recent discovery that future Switch games may actually take advantage of AMD's Fidelity FX super resolution technology, which leverages upscaling in order to boost frame rate and graphical performance on pre-existing hardware, it's very possible that we may see improvement in that respect much sooner than expected. But even so, I'm really hoping that the next Nintendo Switch model, whenever that may be, can find a happy middle ground between improved hardware and performance without sacrificing too much on size and portability. because software upscaling is only going to take the system so far. Nevertheless, even with current hardware, absent technologies like FSR, I have to say that I was very impressed to see some of the ported games that the Switch is able to support. I mean, there is a solid amount of legitimate games that I would have deemed only playable on PlayStation, Xbox, or PC hardware. Games like World War Z, Hellblade, Doom Eternal, Crysis, Assassin's Creed, Witcher 3, Alien Isolation, Dark Souls, Dying Light. Like, how is the Switch able to run these games? It's incredible. And to be honest, outside of portability, for me, this is probably the biggest draw for the Switch system as a whole. Yes, I love Nintendo exclusives, but Nintendo exclusives, plus the ability to play a ton of very solid ports on the go, and not to mention indies and occasional PC ports. Yes, sign me up. I've actually even repurchased some ports for the Switch, such as Crysis and Bioshock Trilogy, that I previously owned, because I know that I'm a lot more likely to replay and complete them on the Switch. This allows me to dedicate more time to playing larger, more demanding games and newer releases for my higher powered consoles. I'm even starting to get back into some top-downs and 2D games such as Eternal Blade 2, Hades, Hungry Shark, Zombieland, and Jet Cave Adventure. Now, before we get into the meat of some of these games, I have to take a second to talk about Nintendo's subscription plans, which are divided up between Nintendo Switch Online and Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack. In addition to online play, the Nintendo Switch Basic Online plan grants members access to an OK library of NES and Super NES games, such as Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong Country, and Super Mario World. The service also provides a backup save data cloud. This is the individual plan that I paid for $19.99, but I really don't like the fact that N64 and Sega games have been placed behind a second paywall that is Expansion Pack. For what these services provide, which is predominantly access to a fairly limited classics library with little enhancements, for me, it's difficult to justify paying the Nintendo Switch Online plus Expansion Pack. And I'm not really a huge Animal Crossing guy, so the DLC doesn't really move me one way or the other. And it's cool that Nintendo threw in a booster pass for the expansion, but I'd much rather own this DLC rather than rent it. I'd personally like to see direct digital discounts, not vouchers, in the eShop as a perk of being an online member, as well as some Wii U and 3D classics added on to these services, especially considering that the Wii U and 3DS online stores are being closed down to better enhance the overall value proposition. All that said, let's take a look at some of the top games that I've really been enjoying on the Switch so far, as well as a few Nintendo Direct titles that I've marked on the calendar. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was the game that I was looking forward to playing first and foremost to solidify that I now own a Nintendo Switch. I know that for some people it's Breath of the Wild, but for me, Nintendo would not be Nintendo if it wasn't for Mario Kart. Now, I chose to pick up Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in digital format for the whopping $59.99 asking price, even though the physical equivalent is currently selling for $49.99, because I had a feeling that I'd be playing this game very sporadically, so I didn't want to have to worry about hunting down the cartridge whenever the mood strikes. I have to say, for an 8-year-old game, it's incredible how well Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has held up since the original release on Wii U back in 2014. Single player, multiplayer, online play, wireless play, this game has something for everybody. And to this day, I'm still in awe of the Switch Joy-Con engineering, allowing for co-op play using a single pair of Joy-Cons in horizontal orientation. What other console package can you immediately pick up and play co-op without making any additional purchases? Immortal Phoenix Rising is an open-world RPG action-adventure game from Ubisoft that completely flew under the radar for me when it was first released back in 2020. But when this title popped up for an eShop sale, I pulled the trigger after playing the complimentary demo. I've always been a fan of Greek mythology, which is why I love the God of War franchise so much. And while this game plays nothing like God of War, it does slightly borrow from some of the concepts, such as the ability to wield otherworldly weapons and magic, such as Achilles' sword and Daedalus' wings, to aid you in your journey across Olympus to save the Greek gods. What I really like most about this game is the graphics and the game mechanics that's very reminiscent of Breath of the Wild. It features a solid weapons and armors upgrade system, along with skill and godly power achievements. Anshi is a game unlike anything I've ever played before. Simply put, you play as an extraterrestrial being that's on a mission to explore the mysterious world of Anshi using a futuristic hoverboard craft. Your goal is to retrieve memories throughout the planet from your ancestors' past. This game is all about exploration and discovery, and the soundtrack invokes a sense of calm and imagination. Throughout your journey, you encounter caves, temples, and vast deserts that look very similar to the images captured on Mars. Handheld and dock mode have been my predominant method of playing, usually in the late hour when everyone else is asleep. This is the perfect game to pick up for sleepless nights or just for days when you want to kick back and let your imagination run free. Bayonetta 2. I have been wanting to play this game ever since I played the original all the way back on my PS3, but Platinum Games has since made the Bayonetta franchise exclusive to Nintendo hardware. But I take great solace now in knowing that I no longer have to miss that train going forward as a Nintendo Switch OLED owner. Though I do have to say, that reassurance comes with a bit of disappointment on the back end, understanding that could mean we may never see 4K graphics at 60 FPS or higher for Bayonetta 3, at least not in the immediate future. I've been enjoying Bayonetta 2 at limited doses rather than racing straight through, as details of Bayonetta 3 still hangs in the balance.
Nintendo Direct.
When Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course was first announced during the latest Direct, it was met with a bag of mixed emotions. On one hand, fans were happy to see Mario Kart resurfacing on the Switch after the initial release back in 2017. But on the other hand, a Booster Course Pass wasn't exactly on the all-time Nintendo Direct wishlist. I can say that as someone that's still getting my feet wet with Mario Kart 8, I personally was not as let down as a lot of folks understandably were. But when I think more critically about this entire debacle, I find myself leaning more towards being in favor of a booster course rather than a full-blown Mario Kart 9 release on this pre-existing hardware. I would much rather see Mario Kart 9 drop on an entirely new Switch console altogether, preferably a Nintendo Switch 2 versus a Pro model. But that's just me. Let me know your thoughts down below. In summary, the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Pass has a pre-order list price of $24.99 and is planned to be released in 6 waves, each wave containing 8 additional courses beginning from March 22 all the way to the end of 2023, which I don't know, could suggest that we may not see new Switch hardware until 2024 at the latest. If that turns out to be true, suddenly AMD's FSR technology is starting to make even more sense. Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Have you ever seen the sequel to a video game that you never really delved into and thought, wow, that looks pretty good? That was my experience when I saw the trailer for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and now I'm seriously thinking about picking up Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is slated for a September launch this year, and is detailed to have heavy ties to Xenoblade 1 and 2, so I dare not attempt to jump in blindly. I will pose a question to the folks that are well versed in the series though. If I picked up 1 or 2 for now, which would you say is most critical in terms of storyline, Xenoblade 1 or 2? And last but not least, the Nintendo Direct game announcement that I'm most looking forward to date is Nintendo Switch Sports. I'm actually really excited to be able to play this modern motion simulated sports game. Coming up, the closest game that I owned to this genre was Sports Champion, which is played using PlayStation Move controllers and a camera system, which I still play to this day. This new iteration of esports is actually the very game responsible for jumpstarting FSR rumors. If we're able to see a true uptick in graphics and FPS for the current Switch, Nintendo Switch Sports is a perfect game to start with. With so many games cramped into a single offering, there's bound to be something for everyone. Nintendo is even going to include a leg strap accessory with the purchase of a physical copy. And for those that prefer to go digital, the list price is actually going to be slightly cheaper, so you can use those savings to pick it up. This is a game that the entire household can pick up and play. And to top things off, golf is planned to be released sometime in the fall. Nintendo Switch Sports has a planned release of April 29th this year, and pre-orders are now open. In the early days of playing the Nintendo Switch OLED, I was honestly banking on the Nintendo exclusives to overshadow the fact that the system as a whole is vastly underpowered as compared to the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. But what's most fascinating after these couple of months of heavy usage is the realization that for me, the exclusive software isn't the only attribute that solidifies its place among my next-gen consoles, because the Switch's engineering places the console in a lane of its own, absent flagship games and iconic characters, given its ability to disrupt conventionality. And when you marry that with Nintendo's willingness to open their APIs to third-party publishers for ports, traditionally limited to living rooms and desktop setups, it's admissible to say that the Switch's appeal extends far beyond that of the little guy sporting blue overalls. But in spite of an ecosystem that merges portability and flexibility, there are handheld devices such as Steam Deck that are comparably priced and promise similar attributes as well. Handhelds are getting a lot more powerful, where emulation of some Nintendo titles are even possible. Though of course, Nintendo will always remain the primary source to enjoy the latest games. I say this to preface that I believe The next-gen Switch hardware is going to need to make a substantial leap to maintain its dominance and appeal in the handheld space for less diehard fans. I would love to see a 1080p OLED display with 4K resolution output capability in dock mode for the next-gen Switch. And I really hope that as Nintendo moves forward with closing out eShops for older hardware, we see more of those titles moved over to the Switch subscription services. I'd personally also like to see improvement with the Bluetooth technology as well, so that both audio and mic functionality can be supported. And if we ever get a new Nintendo Pro controller, Nintendo, please include an audio jack port for wired headsets. I know we're living in 2022, but every Pro controller should have this. Gripes aside, overall, I couldn't be happier with my purchase of the Nintendo Switch OLED, and my kids are simply going to have to get their own, because this one is getting used heavily. The console trifecta is complete, and I am whole. For now. No matter what life throws at me now, I'll always be able to squeeze in some gaming here and there, and I can now enjoy exclusives on all sides. With a sprinkle of Game Pass, life is pretty good. For those hardworking busy fathers out there, to you I say that you owe yourself a Nintendo Switch OLED. Cheers, and keep on doing what you're doing. Before I wrap, I'm curious to know your percentage estimate for playing the Switch between handheld, tabletop, and dock mode. And what top 3 Nintendo Direct announcements are you looking forward to the most? Also, drop any Switch game recommendations that you have for me down below, whether it be ports or exclusives. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know by dropping a like on this video. And also don't forget to sub and hit the bell if you haven't already, so you don't miss the upcoming Switch OLED accessories deep dive. As always, thanks for watching and supporting the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace. Be well.